Good night. Hi there. How are you, Pete?
Hey.
Hi. Welcome,
See you,
everyone.
Wendy.
Welcome, everyone, to our second video cast of To Be Known. At Kerith Church, we believe that to be known is to be loved, and we want to know you. I'm Wendy Jackson. I'm your host. I'm a counselor and a psychotherapist, and my guest this evening is Pete Moon from our Bracknell site. Pete has graciously stepped in to fill in for Lisa Owens, who is recovering from surgery tonight and taking some much-deserved rest. So thanks so much for last minute getting all prepared and ready to share your story with us, Pete. Really appreciate that.
You're welcome. No problem.
And just for all you that are out there, this is meant to be an interactive experience. We want to hear what you have to say. We'd love to have you as part of the conversation. So please ask your questions, post any comments. If you're feeling like something that we're talking about touches you or is like your story, we'd love to know that. And if you have a question, we'd love to talk about that as well. So our topic tonight is depression and its close cousin, anxiety. And so Pete, just let's get sorted. Let's settle a little bit in here. And just you've been really generous over the years to share your story from the front at Kerith. And really happy to have you here tonight, and would love to just hear a little bit about your experience of depression, what that was like for you. I know there was an element of anxiety in there as well, and give us some context, because I know it's a long story for you.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, so feel free to stop me if I'm going on, but I'll do my best to kind of try and sort of summarize my journey. But so yeah, my name's Pete, and when I was 7, my mum took her own life, and that was kind of after a battle that she had had with kind of physical illness and mental illness. So really, the mental illness in a lot of ways was brought on by the physical illness. So she had cancer. She had also suffered the loss of a baby, which would have been my younger sister for me. Lost her kind of full term, was very close to kind of giving birth, and unfortunately died in the womb. And then there was also a medical accident related to the chemo treatment she was getting. So there was a whole kind of sort of list of things going on for her. There was also a little bit of mental health kind of going on in her side of the family as well. So she had grown up with a mum who had really had a pretty terrible journey with mental health as well. So I'm guessing that could have affected her and kind of her upbringing and that kind of thing. So, but anyway, yeah. So from the age of 7, it kind of left myself, my dad, and my brother in a left in dazed and confused kind of situation. And really, from the age of 7, probably, through to my teens, I think the way that my dad kind of dealt with it was just to kind of just be busy, get on with life. We didn't, to be honest, really talk about it much. He didn't talk about emotions. He didn't encourage us to talk about our emotions. So in a lot of ways, it just felt like it was kind of a bit swept under the carpet, and we just kind of just got on with life. Both me and my brother, he felt that the right decision about schooling was to send us to boarding school, which looking back wasn't the greatest experience of my life. I did get bullied quite a lot at secondary school, and although there was some kind of highs and lows there, actually that probably didn't really help really towards the kind of the anxiety that I think I've probably had most of my life, kind of especially kind of an underlying anxiety. But I think as I got older, that I think more the kind of the pressures of life that begin to hit us, and I think maybe some of us can identify with this, is that things start to come out, the more kind of pressure gets put on us. But anyway, I came to faith at the age of 19. And I think that was partly really helped by me kind of asking the big questions of life. It was really asking the questions of what happened to my mum? What happens when I die? What's my purpose in life, and all that kind of stuff. So there was a real kind of, that was a massive change for me in my life, really, in so many ways. So I think to fast forward a little bit, just to kind of to really kind of come on to a lot more in terms of what we're talking about tonight in terms of anxiety and depression, I would say probably it hadn't I hadn't really experienced maybe really kind of full on kind of anxiety and depression until kind of later in life. So kind of fast forwarding to 2004, I got married to Alex. I think that was probably the first year of, for me, really starting to experience some kind of depression, because I was going through a difficult kind of work and kind of church scenario in that first year. And I think just reality of life of getting married and just, you know, suddenly sharing your life with somebody else, that's, you know, that's a massive thing. And then we moved to Bracknell and moved to Kerith in 2005, started our family in 2006. So so Maya was born in 2006, Alia was born in 2008, and I was still struggling to find what I wanted to do with my life, with work. And so I think it was like this pressure cooker of kind of life, really affected me in quite a big way. So, you know, marriage, kids, work, was this kind of like melting pot really for just things kind of starting to really, like, you know, in terms of a pressure cooker, it just like, it was started like the lid was starting to come off. And I think for me, anxiety and depression really kind of really started to kind of show itself in different ways, which weren't particularly nice, especially for those closest to me, especially for Alex. So so just things like anger, feeling really low, feeling really tired all the time, like, you know, sleeping a lot, or just feeling really irritable all the time. And just sort of thinking, what's wrong with me? I mean, I think there was kind of signs of it through kind of like my teenage and sort of 20s, in terms of, I think especially in my faith walk, sometimes I'd read a lot of books about anxiety and sort of think, I just need to sort myself out, pull myself together, and just trust God more. And then, you know, I felt like I should be able to fix myself, and sometimes then ended up feeling guilty that it wasn't fixed, and thinking like, you know, what something was wrong. But then I just quite often still managed to kind of push through it when I was still single, and still kind of maybe just still, I don't think I intentionally suppressed it, but I was kind of getting to a point where it was becoming more obvious that there was some really big kind of underlying issues in those kind of times of pressure.
Yeah, when we talked about this a little bit before, you talked about not even realizing that it was any different, because it had been so much of your life had felt that way. To realize that there was another way of being or operating.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Surprising.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think for me, it would kind of like, it seemed kind of normal that like what I had experienced in terms of how I'd lost my mum, and how, like, you know, I mean, that, you know, it was a huge thing really. And I think, I mean, I was speaking to my brother about it recently, who's also done some counselling like myself, and a counsellor being able to say to us, you know, you have been a child of trauma. And for someone else to be able to actually explain it to us and go, you know, you've gone through something really significant here. And so, so for things like, for me, getting married to Alex and then meeting her family and realizing that actually it was a completely different experience to kind of to grow up with a loving mother figure, and to everyone in her family really good at expressing their emotions. I was really rubbish at verbalizing my emotions and kind of being able to express them in what is, you know, in a way for them. So I guess, looking at me, I was a bit strange, because I didn't do that. And so I feel like I've had so much to learn in that way. But I think, so I think kind of moving on from that, there were, with all that kind of sort of, you know, was quite kind of with me suppressing a lot of these emotions, it did become quite, I guess, quite toxic in some ways, because it was just spilling out, you know. And I think that's the way things we begin to do, is it just begins to leak, and people start to see the effects of that.
You draw a good visual of just, you know, the lid is on, it's contained, you know, and just more is going in there as time goes on, and as you get older, and, you know, the stresses of school, but then the stresses of family life and the responsibilities and work. And I can just see, you know, the lifting and the spilling.
And it can be quite unpleasant. It's unpleasant for the person, you know. For me, it was unpleasant, because I was like, what's going on? What is all this stuff? And then obviously unpleasant for the people around you. And so I think, yeah, there was a first time when it wasn't that long after we had moved to Bracknell that I tried some counselling. I think I quickly realised it wasn't the counselling for me, because it was very much a kind of I'm sure there's you probably know the word for this type of counselling. It was kind of like the listen only one, where they basically don't really say anything. Yeah, and I just found that just wasn't helpful for me. And I think yeah, I think there's probably different types of counselling. I guess we'll come on to this, but so for me that wasn't helpful. I needed someone to help me kind of kind of like work through stuff. But yeah, so we quickly found somebody else who was much more proactive and super helpful, asking lots of good questions. And initially we went because I think it was Alex and I were just really I don't think it's not like we had a terrible marriage, but I think because of my emotional baggage, it was really affecting our marriage. And so we wanted to do anything we could to kind of make us kind of work, and for us to obviously for things to get better. And so what we did realize quickly after doing sort of sessions together with the counsellor, we realized pretty quickly that I needed to do one-to-one stuff with the counsellor. And so so there was loads of stuff that I then did one-to-one that we just went all the way back to the start. So we were looking at my childhood, we were looking at all the kind of the emotional stuff, all the kind of talking all through things like anxiety and loss and grief and bereavement and all that sort of stuff, really. So but yeah, there was kind of a few things happening at the same time, and there was also a moment where as well as kind of getting help in that way, that Alex was really encouraging me to kind of go to the doctor as well, because I think maybe I was a little bit resistant to that, and just kind of maybe didn't want to acknowledge that I needed to. I don't know whether I was. I wouldn't say I was anti kind of getting help or medication, but I think it just needed that a little bit of just a push, a nudge to kind of get across that line. And yeah, it felt like a really big thing to sit in front of the doctor, and it was great to have Alex there and just go, I think I really need some help. And I just remember just really breaking down and just being really in tears and just kind of going, I don't know what's wrong with me. Please help. What do I do? And so there was a mixture of that and some counselling that really started to. I think when the lid comes off and it all comes out, just getting that kind of those lifelines really kind of helped to kind of go, okay, what's the next steps? What do I do from here? Because I think without that, I would have just been like all over the place.
And I'm hearing a lot of resources there. I'm hearing, your marriage and your partner, help from the GP, help from a counselor, a church, finding a church that felt comfortable, and finding your place there. It's not just one thing, it's a combination of a bunch of.
No, for sure. Yeah. So I think initially it was counselling, and then it was I think actually the next thing was I was also, because what came out of the counselling was I was doing a lot of sort of one-to-one bereavement stuff, but then I also wanted to kind of think about, actually from a faith perspective, is there anything out there that I can kind of also access where I can maybe do group stuff with other people? And so that's when I came across the Bereavement Journey, which was being run in London at HTB in London at that time. This is over 10 years ago, and that was just really, really great. It's a 6-week course like we run at Kerith, but I've got to be honest that when I first sort of signed up, and then on the first night when I went up there, I just commuted up to London, over a 6-week period once a week. I think the first night I was there, I just remember feeling like super anxious before I walked in the door. I just thought, what am I doing? I just thought, this is like 25 odd years after my mum died. Like I'm going to be the only one in the room who's like this. Everyone's going to think I'm weird. Like what, but it was just such a huge breath of fresh air, because it's just, I realized it's never too late to process grief. It's never too late to process anxiety or depression, that kind of stuff. But for me, I was particularly kind of zoning in on the grief thing, where I think actually a lot of the anxiety and depression was coming from, or what was causing it. And it was amazing to be in a room with other people who just completely got you, and you got them, and everyone had very different stories, but you all shared this very similar experience. And I mean, obviously that's a big part of my story, so I can't really talk about all the anxiety and depression and stuff without talking about the grief, because that's just such a huge kind of like thing in my life, which, you know, will just has affected my whole life really. And so there was that, and then it was kind of off the back of that then that, as well as talking to the doctor, that then I then started to try some medications, and there's a bit of journey with that as well, which I can talk about if you want me to. But
So I'm just going to kind of go through some of the things that you said. I just want to point out some of the things that you did along your journey that are really helpful things and resources that are available, and sometimes really hard to get yourself out the door to do. And, you know, you're talking about making a trip at night after work into London with anxiety to process this grief that you've, that's been sitting there for so long. And, you know, one of the things about grief is grief doesn't go away. It might change over the years, but it will, I picture it almost like a spiral staircase, and you just kind of come around back on it at different times. And sometimes it feels further away, and sometimes it's close up. There's reminders of grief all the time. So 25 years is, 50 years is there's still,
they talk about grief in the bereavement journey as like a circular trench. Like you just like keep kind of going around. I was
going up in a stair, you're going down. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair
You
enough.
keep kind of finding yourself like back at the same place. You're like, what? How am I still here?
Well, exactly. And what you said about hearing other people's stories and their journeys, and just having someone who gets it. You know, we try so hard to be understanding and empathetic of the people that we love and what they're going through, but it's not quite the same as somebody who actually has experienced it and has a taste or a flavor for what that feels like inside. Can really make a difference. And we're often hesitant to go share in a group setting. And yet it could be, the best thing that we can do for ourselves sometimes is to put ourselves in that situation.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I know for some people, like a group setting, it's been the last thing they'd like to do. But I mean, and so for some people, they just only prefer to do one-to-one things, and we totally get that with like the bereavement journey. That it's, maybe either a not at all, or maybe a not yet for people. But for me, I just wanted to do everything I could. I think once the lid had come off, I was like, I just want to do everything I can to. I realized that I've got a massive issue here that has been unresolved. There was so much unresolved grief, so much unresolved stuff around my, anxiety and depression. I was like, I just want to do whatever I can to kind of really just get help with this. That's
great. The other thing you talked about that is really important to note is that when you found counseling and it wasn't comfortable, you changed counseling. And that's a really important thing to know, is that there are different flavors of counseling.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, you were describing person-centered counseling, which is I would call that skilled listening. And it's very empathetic and understanding, and it's good that somebody gets you, but it's not always the kind of work that you want to do. And then you described working with the counselor and kind of going back over the events of the past, and we call that psychodynamic counseling. And really looking at how the things that happened in the past come into your present life and are still part of your present life, and how you then, the first step I think is to be aware, like how much that's really affecting you in the present. And fair enough, a lot of that work is understanding, of course you feel that way. Based on the things that you were describing, and you're talking about from age 7 and up after your mom's death, but you also described a whole bunch of stuff that happened before she died. Baby loss, cancer, various health issues, mental health issues. So home was, even prior to your mom's death, there's stuff that was going on.
Of course. And then obviously, like, some of the stuff that I was working through was things like, did my, if for my mum to do that, to herself, made me think, did she love us? Like, it was kind of questioning all that kind of stuff, because, I just don't have early memories of things like, being hugged by my mum, or like, even her being around, because the last 2 years before she took her own life, she was just in and out of hospital a lot. She really wasn't well. So in some ways she was even absent, probably even up to the age of 5. So it was kind of got very few memories of her. And so there was the whole load of like baggage even in that way around, like, you know, was I loved? Would you, you know, what was she like? You know, did she care? You know, all that sort of stuff. And I think, you know, some of the stuff that we were able to work through was actually realizing, you know, from looking at things like photos and all the rest of it, is that it wasn't that she, you know, didn't love us. She was just very unwell, and yeah, mentally and physically. So yeah, so there's definitely like processing a lot of emotions around that. Yeah, so
we were talking about medication and then getting
so I was going to I definitely think there's always worth a conversation around medication, because again, I think, well, medication and mental health is that there can still be a stigma around it, especially in not just in churches, but just in general. But I think also in the church, I think there can be, and maybe still is sometimes, like questions around, you know, should we be using medication, and like, you know, what's the deal with mental health if people haven't experienced it before? Is it just something that's made up in people's heads? All that kind of thing, really. But I mean, for me, it was a journey. I tried one about, and it was probably a good sort of 12, 13 years ago, where I tried fluoxetine. Maybe I didn't give it a good enough, didn't try it maybe, or didn't do it long enough, but I didn't feel like it made any difference. And then a few years later, I thought I'll revisit it. I tried sertraline, and then that I had some really bad side effects with it, which I won't really go into, but it wasn't very pleasant. But and then I tried, and I thought, well, I'll give it one last shot. And I was just like, so I tried citalopram, and initially, like, kind of nothing was really happening. But you know, it takes time for SSRIs to get into your body and also out. So I had to wait some time for the sertraline to kind of get out, and then trying the sertraline again. So it did feel like a bit of oh gosh, like, you know, is anything really good? Is it going to make any difference? And but for me, it was quite. It wouldn't say quite. It was a big breakthrough, really. That after about sort of 5 or 6 weeks of taking citalopram, it was an incredible kind of sense of almost like a fog lifting. I wouldn't. So it kind of almost felt like a little bit of like a kind of like a partial healing, in the sense of I was like, wow, so it's actually possible to feel like this, you know. It was almost like, it was really hard to describe. It's like, so I don't always have to feel like that, but then at the same time, I would say that it's not like it's been like this miracle cure, because I still have my ups and downs. I still have, like, you know, there are some real peaks and troughs still with it, and sometimes I was sort of thinking, you know, do I stay on the on the medication when I'm feeling okay, or like, you know, if I'm feeling really bad, should I up it? And so there's still a little bit of a journey with it. But I think for me, it's just like I mean, I just think a lot of the time, especially when we think about medication and also mental health, I just think, you know, God has clearly gifted doctors, pharmacists who've made, or, you know, people who pharmaceuticals have made, like, these drugs, and counselors like yourself, you know, God has made them, you know, hands and feet in our world to help people. And I just think, you know, we need to talk openly about it, and just to be real and open about these kind of stories and our journeys with it, because it can be super helpful for people. And it's not something to kind of say, oh, you know, if only your faith was stronger or something like that, then we wouldn't need to be taking this kind of medication. But I think I just tried it for so many years of, like, trying to push through with the whole kind of, you know, what the Bible says about, you know, don't be anxious, and having guilt trips about that. And I think there's a conversation we can probably have about that. But I think, you know, there's probably a difference between when Jesus tells us not to worry and people who are actually experiencing some kind of actual mental health around that. And actually that some of us actually really do need to take off our masks, get some help, and actually realize that some of these things, you know, that God is using to help people get well and get better. And that's not a second class healing, you know, that's not a second class kind of work of God. So
it's everything. And what you're bringing up some really good points about the medical aspects of depression. And, you know, I would describe it, and, you know, tell me if you associate with this, but, you know, I describe it like there's a line, and we can tell when we're feeling low, but we're still coping and we're managing. We may be a little slow or tired. We might be having disappointments or something of that nature, and we can feel it. But then there's a day you wake up and you're below the line, and that's now become medical. It's a physical thing. It's not just an emotional thing anymore.
Yeah.
And what's happening in your brain at that time, if I very quickly do quick neuroscience, from your head to your gut and back up is how the hormones work. And some of the hormones that manage our mood are manufactured in our gut, and they come back up into the brain. And various things happen that cause changes in the flow of the hormone. So anxiety, stress, trauma, that will increase the stress hormone and decrease the hormones like serotonin and dopamine, which are the ones that give you that clear mind, thinking, the happy feelings, or that not even happy, but just content, where you can just feel content. And so when we get past that line, our body is actually not firing on all cylinders. And you made excellent points about the various different medications, because it is not a one size fits all issue. It's very dependent on other things going on in your body, the symptoms that you're having. And unfortunately, the way that our health system works is it's a protocol. So first they're going to give you this one and see how that did. If it's not doing well, maybe they'll give you a little bit more, see if that does better. If that doesn't work, then they'll try something else. If that doesn't work, same process, and then they'll try something else.
Yeah, I did find it a bit weird in that way, because the doctor was like, well, what do you want to try? I was like, I've got no idea. And he was like, it's not like they can kind of go, oh, this one's going to work for you, kind of thing. Yeah.
Now, what you can do, and this is just important information, if you are feeling depressed, and I think Becky's going to put it up on the chat, you can actually do a questionnaire on the NHS site. It's called the PHQ-9, and that's asking some questions about your mood and what's going on. And the other one's called the GAD-7, and that's about anxiety. And that will kind of tell you if you're in a range that you should go see the GP and talk to them about. And one of the things that you do have the right to do when you talk to the GP and you're getting medication is you can ask for a psychiatric consult. And because really what the GP is going to do is exactly what you described, Pete. What do you want to try? You want this one, that one? Going to open a book, the same book that you can open, and read about the different medications. And so you can request a psychiatric evaluation where the psychiatrist is actually going to look at what's going on with you and do a bit more of bespoke kind of, this is what might be helpful for you. And if you can't get that, you can at the very least ask your GP to do a psychiatric consult, get on the phone with a psychiatrist and talk it through. So there's some magic words in the system, that can be helpful. So after 3 tries, you found a medication that was helpful. Yeah. And have you been consistently on the medication?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think when I first started citalopram, but I've probably been taking for at least sort of 6-7 years, maybe, and at different kind of levels. But I think I have kind of played with it a little bit in terms of kind of dosages and how much to take. But I think I've just felt like at the moment not to kind of come off at any time soon, just because of how much it has helped. But then, I mean, kind of like I kind of said, it's not. I don't think you can kind of 100% rely on it, because obviously there's still, it's not a kind of a total kind of like magic fix, but it is a huge help for anyone who is kind of in that real dark place. I mean, I do. I mean, but I must admit, I've got to be honest that I still get some some of those dark days, kind of, I think Churchill referred to it as the black dog. I still have some of those black dog days. And there's just doesn't seem any rhyme or reason sometimes why I feel like that. I'll just wake up in the morning and just feel like, ugh, gosh, I'm not sure if I can do today. But it definitely helps most of the
That's
time.
kind of scary when that happens too. I've had experience with depression also, and I think I find it quite scary when I'm low. Oh no, am I gonna get, am I going into a depression? And it sometimes it's just a sad day or a bad day.
Yeah.
Question for you. In those dark days, Pete, what do you do that helps?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I was actually thinking about that. And sometimes I have to remind myself of the fact that I will get through it, because sometimes when you're in that moment, you're like, I just can't deal with this. And kind of have to think back to how it was whenever, a few weeks back, and think, normally I'm at my worst in the morning. So sometimes I know I've just got to get up and get on with the day. Like, because sometimes it can be literally as soon as I wake up, I'm just like, oh, I'm in that kind of dark zone. I mean, for me, I've really been trying to make sure I'm running 4 times a week. So just doing some exercise, just getting going in the beginning of the day. I'm not a brilliant morning person, but I have been running in the mornings, and I find that kind of just helps with the kind of natural endorphin kind of thing. But yeah, just trying to have routine. Like, I think sometimes it's when the kind of routine goes out the window, that can be like when you're tempted to kind of, I don't know, stay in bed, or just, where I think it's when my mind is kind of maybe kind of overactive. So just trying to, just carry on and just push through, because sometimes it might only be sort of 2 or 3 hours. If I can just push through that exercise, get through breakfast, get through kind of like starting my day, that can be a really big thing. But it can be a little bit tricky, because obviously I think sometimes people just think, it can be a little bit like grief, in the sense of, oh, is it over? Is it finished? Is it going away? Is it done? So I think it's not
That's
always
kind
of cut as it's just, there's something that you can just fix that with. But yeah, so it's not always that straightforward, if I'm honest. Some days are better. Sometimes I'm like, I'm not going for a run because I don't feel like it, and then that's not always a great way for me to start my day. But yeah,
sometimes it's important to just listen to yourself and be kind to yourself. And sometimes being kind means not running, and sometimes being kind means running.
Yeah.
You mentioned breakfast, and nutrition is a really important part of this as well, and often nutritional imbalances, vitamin deficiencies, thyroid problems, things like that, mask as depression. They come out as depression. And there are actually certain supplements or foods that actually help ease depression. And so that thought of, when you're low, eating breakfast is, it's more than a throwaway comment. It's really important.
No, definitely. I mean, for those of you who haven't done it, I mean, the Hope and Depression course is great, because they do look at this in a whole kind of module on one of their sessions, and I really recommend that. I found that really useful to kind of go over the whole kind of how your body is affected by what you put in your mouth every day. And so a lot of the things that I've been looking at are things like, I think for me, too much sugar is not good. And that, I think that's quite a big thing that they talk about, is, just all the kind of, all the sugars that can just be so easily in our diet. But then there's also, I think for me, just thinking about, just what those kinds of energies that you get. So the kind of the carbohydrates, and, am I having enough of the kind of the carbohydrates, and just, fruit and veg and all that kind of stuff, really, because I think I mean, well, actually go kind of also just looking at, something that I actually got diagnosed with, colitis a few years back as well. And, that can be maybe related to, trauma or kind of anxiety and stuff. But one of the things I've had to also do is just work out actually what is good for my gut. And they do talk about kind of gut health in the Hope and Depression course. And for me, I actually did one of these kind of gut microbiome test things, and actually that was really interesting. That was super helpful, just to sort of think about what does my gut and my body need, because like you say, like your kind of the brain and the gut thing is they're realizing is so linked in terms of our kind of mental health. And yeah, so yeah, I mean, I'm sure that you'll be having a really good session with Lisa at some point about all that kind of stuff. So I'm not the fount of all knowledge on that one. So,
but it's important to be conscious of it. And the latest thinking on depression right now is that it is related to inflammation.
Yeah,
and that has to do with the gut. And that it might be if we look at anthropological and evolutionary psychology or biology, it's one of those survival techniques that your body does, that when there's inflammation or infection in your body, you get depressed. And what that causes you to do is withdraw, not be social, not be with other people, rest, sleep, all those things that help your body recuperate from inflammation. And that might be partially, I'm not quite sure. They haven't yet determined what comes first, the chicken or the egg, but there is a very high link of autoimmune diseases and past trauma. And, it's quite apparent. So
yeah, no, it's interesting because the doctor said to me when I was diagnosed, they sort of said it looks like you've had this for years, and it just kind of went undiagnosed. And I'm kind of, in some ways, I'm kind of not surprised based on all the stuff that you've just said. That actually there's, what I've experienced could have been a lot to do with what's been kind of going on in my body physically as well as mentally. Yeah.
And the more, again, depending on how we release that. So you're talking about some really healthy habits that you've gotten into over the last 10 years with exercise and talking and naming emotions and including people that you're in relationship with and what's going on in your head, and those kinds of things. But what happens when we don't do those things, when we, especially coming out of a country that's had a shared trauma with 2 wars, and, we do have a culture where we keep calm and carry on, and we just get on with things.
Yeah.
And, during a wartime, that's really important. But what that leaves us with now is when we don't have words for it, or we don't know how to express it, it internalizes.
Yeah.
And it's in the body somewhere.
Yeah.
And it comes out like anxiety or panic.
Yeah. Or illness, some kind of illness. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's what my dad experienced. I mean, like I said before, like I kind of grew up in a family where we didn't really talk about emotions. It was kind of that from that generation of, British stiff upper lip, don't talk about how you feel, and almost it's like it's a negative thing, it's a bad thing to talk about your feelings, and so I've had to kind of really unlearn all that, and then I'm still in that journey of unlearning it and trying to relearn kind of what like kind of living emotionally healthy looks like, in terms of especially following Jesus. That God doesn't want us to live like that. I really don't believe God wants us to kind of live with all that kind of internalization, and where it all just kind of affects you, and it's really affecting, I think, a generation in terms of today, especially with all the kind of the mental health. 1 in 4 people are going to experience some kind of mental health thing, and apparently 1 in 6 are going to experience anxiety and depression. So you sort of think actually there is a bit of an epidemic of it, and you do wonder how much that's been affected by COVID as well. So yeah.
I'm going to pick up on some of what you're saying in terms of the theological perspective of some of this. And I'm going to ask Becky to put up a slide on this, on the theological perspective of it. And while I'm talking about this, we'd love your questions as well. We've got a bit more time on the video cast, and would love if there's any questions that we could get to. But what I want to share is, so Calvin called the Psalms the anatomy of the soul. And there have been numerous writings, theological writings, trying to map out the Psalms, trying to organize them or categorize them or look at them in different ways. And there's a German theologian named Bergman who developed this mapping of the Psalms that he calls orientation, disorientation, and reorientation. And it's kind of a life journey of this. And so kind of starting in orientation, and if we're looking at Psalms, they're the Psalms that kind of talk to us about when life makes sense, when, Sherry actually shared this today in the sermon with Psalm 8. Let me just read the beginning of it. Lord, O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory in the heavens through the praise of children and infants. You have established a stronghold against your enemies to silence the foe and the avenger. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. Kind of this, life is good. God is in the heavens. He's in control of things. The stars are in the sky. Stuff makes sense. And then something happens in your life and it just knocks the feet out from under you. And you go down into that pit and you are disoriented. Nothing makes sense. It's not the way it was. We have scriptures of the Exodus where the Israelites are saying, at least we had meat in Egypt. Like, I just want to go back to what I knew, even though it was horrible slavery. At least I understood what was expected and how life worked. And you go through this period of disorientation where this isn't me, this isn't how I feel. We've all had this with our experience with COVID. School isn't the same, work isn't the same, home isn't the same, social life isn't the same. Our coping strategies that we normally have, they're not available. All the transitional space in our life is gone. We've all been through this period of it. We just want it to go back to the way we knew it was before. And then through an act of God, a work of God, we start coming out of this pit in what we would call a reorientation. And things start making sense in a new way. God's done a new thing. We have new knowledge or new understanding of ourselves and others, kind of what you talked about in your journey of this, being in the lid exploding and being in that low place. And then all the things that happened over the time that brought you up out of that and until you're in a new orientation. And then, if you saw the slide, and that lasts for a while, and then there'll be another one, and it'll go like that throughout your life. David's got a question. What advice would you give to those who are helping partners with depression? Great question. Thank you, David.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, no, really good question, David. Yeah, I'm just sort of putting myself in Alex's shoes. So for me, I think we had a lot of conversations around it in the days before. I was kind of really getting some help, and I think she felt a bit at the end of her tether, because I think there was an element of trying to just understand kind of what was going. We were both trying to understand what am I actually kind of going through here. So it was super helpful doing counselling together, because that was really great in terms of you're able to kind of be in the room with someone who really understands it and is able to kind of have that you're having that three-way conversation with someone who is a specialist, someone that you're both comfortable with. That's in my story, in our experience, I think we would have said that was really helpful. And then I don't know if we were just talking about this book before we came on, but I think as well doing some reading around it. So this book is called Honesty Over Silence. It's Okay Not to Be Okay by Patrick Regan. And I think for me, not only about reading it about myself, but being able to sort of share with Alex about my wife, about trying to kind of have these conversations about understanding for someone who has, because I think it is really hard for people who haven't had anxiety or depression, really kind of trying to get in the shoes of someone who some of the things they're going through and all the ups and downs that are happening. It can be really, I think, probably really was really quite tough for Alex. And so I don't know whether that's kind of fully answering the question of Wendy, whether you got things that you can chip in about that, but yeah.
Well, I would add I would add that it's important for the person who's supporting someone in depression to have support of their own, because it is a difficult thing. Also, to understand the Hope and Depression course that we run is meant for people that are suffering with depression, but also people that have a loved one who is struggling with depression and they're supporting them. So understanding all those things you were talking about, the holistic aspects of what depression is and what helps, and just understanding it, whether it be a book or a course, that's really helpful to have an understanding of what's happening for your loved one.
Yeah.
And I'll give the cheat sheet, and I'll just say what's happening is Lisa Owens from Hope and Depression, she likes to call it brain flu.
Yeah.
And loved one has brain flu. And so, people will talk about it like walking through treacle. You've got your day, you almost narrate yourself through the day because you don't do automatic thought. I'm waking up now. I should brush my teeth. I should have some breakfast. I should get dressed. I should, it takes thought to do things that normally just come naturally. And so appreciating that.
Make yourself do them, The other thing I would say, and I'm sure Lisa would probably agree, is that I know that there was people on the Hope and Depression course who weren't actually the person suffering with depression, and so they were coming on just for themselves to try and understand it more, and how could they help someone in their life who has got depression. I think those people found it really helpful as well, because they were learning all about it, how to kind of help give that support. So
Katrina has a question about advice for starting conversations with a friend when we wonder whether they're depressed, and it's another great question. It's really important to listen, I would say, and to be patient with the person. So a really open question, something like, I'm noticing that you're not, you don't seem quite yourself today. Is something going on for you? Is there something that you might want, that you want to talk about? An invitation. If you're aware a friend is depressed, there's great things you can do for your friends if they're struggling with depression and you know it. And I know, when I've been depressed, my community has been incredible, and I've learned to share that because the support is so wonderful. People making sure, hey, you want to come to lunch today? Have a walk. I remember, when Lisa Owens was going through her depression, I went to her house on laundry day, and we did laundry and watched movies and just like, let me help you through the day. Even things like, hey, I'm going to the market. You want to come to the market? Because choosing food when you're depressed is really difficult. I'm making lasagna for dinner tonight, and giving suggestions to your friend, because you just can't think through. I know when I was depressed, I would come back from the grocery store, and I'd have, 5 jars of peanut butter in the pantry, 10 jars of tomato sauce, and no bread and no eggs and no butter, and just your head is not there. So friends can be really helpful with practical things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're coming to our time, and I do want to make sure that we talk a little bit about all the resources that we have at Kerith for people that are struggling with depression and anxiety, and it's really quite a lot. And Pete and I were talking earlier that Pete's done all of them. I've done
most
almost
of it, I think.
but Becky's going to put it up on the chat for you, the page, so that you can go to the page. But we have a course called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, which is really great for processing things about your life, growing up, and how you process emotion, how you argue, how you how you handle being up and being down, and what those things mean for you, and from a theological perspective. And that's a great course. There's Freedom in Christ, which is all the promises of God in one nice little package, done on a weekly basis to really look and apply how those things are in your life, and really getting free from some of the things that, again, may have been in your past or still in your present.
Yeah.
The prayer course. We've got the CAP debt counseling, which for a lot of people, money issues are a cause of depression and struggle. And so that's a wonderful course. And then, of course, our CAP counselors that are great. We've got all kinds of life groups studying all kinds of things, but small group community, people that you can pray with, talk with, learn with, grow with, make those community connections. And they can be as deep or as fun as you want. We've got dog walking groups, and we've got the Bible course. We've got all kinds of things available depending on what it is that you're feeling up to, really. And then we've got a whole list of pastoral care in our church. And if Becky's going to put this up as well, of just our various site pastors and people that are on our Bracknell site, or Windsor site, or West White site, and our formerly BV site, soon to be Farnham site. But we have touch people in all of those places, and you can see that on the website as well, to talk with or to help you access the kind of resources that we have in the community. And then, of course, we've mentioned it several times, Hope and Depression course, which highly recommend. If you run a small group, if you have any contact with people that are experiencing depression, or you've had it yourself, it's a wonderful resource to have. It will really, so educational, so community, so beautifully done. The Bereavement Journey course that you mentioned as well. And then first and last, I would say Alpha. If you haven't done Alpha, if you're finding yourself in a low place, it's a great place to start, and just really thinking about what your relationship with God is, who God is, who you are. All of those things are available through the community here. And as a counselor, it really, I'm thrilled to be part of a church that pays so much attention to mental health and concerns.
I would say don't do it on your own. There's a really good quote from this book. It says, "Church can be a lonely place if you suffer from depression or another mental health condition." So I would say, I think maybe another answer to kind of Katrina's question will be, we can invite someone maybe who we know is in a place maybe where they wouldn't go to one of these like groups on their own, but say, hey, why don't you come and do this with me? That could just be like a way of encouraging them to, access something where they just, so that they're not doing this on their own. So they're not kind of in that isolated place. Because some people are probably going to be more proactive than others in trying to get help. It took me a little bit of a while to kind of really kind of get going to get that help. And that was really helped by Alex kind of pushing me a bit. And some people do need a bit of a push. And so whether that is, coming on one of these things with a friend. So.
And I would be, what you're saying makes me feel especially sensitive to friends that do not have partners, at home, pushing them to go to the GP, being aware of how they're struggling. And so Katrina's question is really important in that, is to be conscious of that, and to, really be there for our friends who are single, that are struggling, and step up. So great way to end. Thank you all for tuning in and being part of our chat tonight. Our next video cast is going to be Sunday, July 18th at 7 p.m. And our guest is going to be Ben Pocock, our Sunday Experience pastor, and we're going to be talking about time in the wilderness. Ben preached on this recently, of that that period of waiting on God's promises, and what that time is like, the difficulty in that time, and theologically, that already and not yet of being a Christian, where we're in the kingdom but we're waiting for the kingdom. And we get a taste of it in some things. We see this on, tonight, with just being really open and honest and truthful about our own experiences. I'm going to get both Pete and I came up with, this was a scripture that we really, both of us wanted. Do you have it in front of you, Pete? Because I have it here if I can find it.
Yeah, I did bookmark it, actually. If you want me to read it out, would you like me to read it out?
We both came to the same place. So
yeah, so it's from 2 Corinthians 1 verse 3, where it says, "Praise be to God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves have received from God." Yeah. So yeah, I think for both of us, we were kind of talking about that beforehand, in terms of, there's things that God's, doing in our lives. And maybe right now you might be sort of thinking, like, I'm not in the kind of place where I can kind of comfort others, but actually, there's sometimes you need to receive, you really need to receive that help. And maybe there'll be a day where you also give, but that we can be on both sides of that. And God wants to use us on both sides of that.
Absolutely. And that, the redeeming the circumstance. If I have to go through this difficult time, if it has to be this bad, redeem it, Lord. Use it for someone else's benefit, for someone else's good, for let this bear fruit at some point in life. And certainly thank you, Pete, and thanks for your service and all the things you do, and
You're welcome.
bereavement course, and front and behind the scenes. And look forward to seeing everybody next month on To Be Known. And have a great evening. Thanks for joining us. Good night.
Cool. Good night.